For 3 long days, a quiet, relentless drizzle had settled over the city of Asheville. This wasn't a loud, angry storm, but a persistent, whispering rain that seemed to tap on window panes, pleading to be let inside, and seeping into every crack it found. It blanketed the city in a kind of somber mood, making the brick sidewalks shine with a dark, reflective sadness, and causing everything to feel heavier and more ancient. In the midst of this gloom, a forgotten house stood waiting. At the very end of Chestnut Avenue, behind iron gates whose hinges were seized with rust and shrouded in ivy, sat the Donnelly house. It was a Victorian home that had lost all its charm. Its once bright white paint had faded to a dull, bone-like yellow, and its front porch drooped with a weary sigh. The windows on the second floor were still adorned with delicate lace curtains, though years had passed since anyone had drawn them aside. One of these windows, in Emily's former room, was marred by a long crack that branched out like a spider's web, as if the house itself had once tried to let out a silent scream and fractured under the strain. Claire hadn't set foot in this place for 15 years. She stood before it now, her palm resting on the cold metal of the gate while her other hand clutched a box of belongings she had vowed never to revisit. A shiver of uncertainty traced its way up her spine like an icy draft, but her mind was made up. She had returned. She heard the faint sound of damp gravel crunching behind her and spun around, but it was only the wind playing tricks, or perhaps the ghost of her own memories, following her like a heavy, rain-soaked coat. With a surge of effort, she forced the gate open. It let out a loud, human-like groan, as if protesting the disturbance. Inside, the air was motionless, not stale but perfectly preserved, as if the entire house had been hermetically sealed at the very moment Emily vanished. The floorboards groaned under the weight of her boots, each sound amplified in the profound silence of a home where no one had spoken above a whisper in ages. She could detect a strange mix of scents, the faint aroma of lavender, the smell of aging wood and paper, and the unmistakable scent of grief. Claire placed the box on the kitchen table. She had stumbled upon it just a week earlier while clearing out her old apartment in Boston. It had been hidden in a cabinet, concealed behind old books and receipts from a decade past. Inside was an old cell phone that, after being plugged in on a whim, had miraculously flickered to life. Its screen was cracked and its case was dented, but the voicemail icon was there, emitting a soft, steady glow. One unheard message. It was dated March 2nd, 2009, the very day Emily had disappeared. She hadn't brought herself to listen to it yet. Outside, the distant rumble of thunder echoed over the mountains. The rain picked up, tapping against the kitchen window like a set of impatient fingers. Claire pulled out a chair and sat, her gaze fixed on the phone. Her thumb hovered over the play button, but her courage failed her. Not yet. Leaving the phone on the table, she decided to wander through the house instead. Maybe its silent walls would offer her clues before the recorded voice did. The upstairs hallway smelled of stagnant air and lemon polish. Her mother used to be a relentless cleaner. After Emily went missing, her obsession had intensified. She would scrub the floors until her knuckles were raw, as if she could physically wash the gilt from the wooden planks. Claire walked past a series of closed doors, her parents' bedroom, which remained locked, the guest room, and finally, Emily's room. She pushed the door open cautiously. Absolutely nothing had been touched. The posters on the wall were curling at the edges, and the bed was made with the meticulous precision only a mother possesses, with perfectly tucked corners and symmetrically arranged pillows. In a corner sat a lone, untied pink Converse sneaker, its partner never recovered. On the dresser was a faded photograph of two girls standing by the downtown carousel. In the picture, Claire was 13 and Emily was 17. They looked like two sisters who still genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Claire reached out, her fingers touching the frame and leaving a clean smudge on the thick layer of dust. That's when she heard it, a sound from downstairs, a quiet electronic beep. She froze, listening intently. It came again. Beep. A pause. Beep. The phone. She raced down the stairs, hurried through the hall, and burst back into the kitchen. The voicemail had started playing on its own. The speaker volume was low, but in the oppressive silence it was more than loud enough. "Claire, hey, it's me." It was Emily's voice, instantly recognizable though it sounded older than Claire remembered. Her tone was hurried and shaky. I don't know if you'll get this. I just wanted to say it's not what it looks like. I know you're going to be angry. You have every right to be. But I didn't have a choice, Claire. I swear they made me." The message abruptly ended. There was no static, no click. The voice simply vanished into nothing. Claire's hand shook as she reached for the phone. It had powered down again, the battery icon flashing empty. For a long moment she stood motionless, listening only to the sound of the rain. What could Emily have meant? They made me. Who were they? She played the message again in her mind, rewinding the last 4 seconds and listening with desperate focus. Underneath Emily's words, she could now hear another faint sound. Was it a voice? No, it was voices. A man and a woman arguing, their words muffled and distant. She couldn't understand what they were saying, but the emotion in their tone was clear. It was pure panic. Claire sank back into the chair, her breathing shallow and her heart pounding in her chest. The voicemail should have provided answers, but instead it only made the mystery more terrifying. The message had never been mentioned in the official police report, never recovered by the detectives. Her father, who was still a police officer back then, had taken Emily's phone and officially logged it as inactive. But what if it wasn't? What if he had heard this message and hidden it? She pulled the box toward her again. Inside were old yearbooks, a folded letter Emily had once written to her, and something she hadn't seen before, a small black cassette tape. She picked it up carefully. Written on the label in a shaky, frantic hand were 2 words: Basement 3 a.m. Claire stared at the tape. As if reacting to her discovery, the rain outside began to beat violently against the house. Then the lights flickered once, then twice, and died, plunging the house into a suffocating, absolute darkness. Claire shot to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs, her fingers tightening around the small cassette. A moment later, a sound echoed through the silent house, a single, deliberate knock. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from below, from the basement. Claire Donnelly had conditioned herself to live a life of quiet moderation. It wasn't a silent existence, but one kept at a low, predictable, and manageable frequency. As an architect in Boston, her passion was breathing new life into old homes. She cherished the opportunity to work on things that were damaged but not irrevocably lost, places with their own scars, history, and stories embedded within their very floorboards. There was a profound sense of comfort in restoring what others had abandoned. It gave her a feeling of command, and her entire world was meticulously built around the concept of control. Her apartment was a testament to this, designed with minimalist and tidy precision. A single coffee mug rested in the sink, and one lone framed photograph sat on the shelf, capturing her mother and father in a time long before their world had fractured. There were no pictures of Emily, not anymore. 15 years had gone by, yet Emily's absence resonated like a persistent noise that Claire could never mute. It was a constant hum beneath the surface of every moment. In restaurants, when another patron ordered a soda Emily used to adore. In department stores, when a woman drifted past, wearing her sister's signature perfume. And in the dead of night, when her dreams spun tales of alternate histories. What if she had pursued her? Back then, Claire was a 21-year-old student at RISD, brimming with ambition, fueled by caffeine, and weighed down by unspoken sibling rivalries. Emily had always been the vibrant one, the boisterous one, the wonderfully complex one. Claire, in contrast, was the shadow, tidying up in the aftermath of her sister's storms. When Emily disappeared, it was Claire who was left behind to gather the shattered fragments, and it was Claire who could never shake the gnawing question of whether she had overlooked a crucial warning sign. She hadn't communicated with her parents in almost 2 years. Her father, Jack, a retired police officer once admired in Asheville for his discipline and sharp instincts, had retreated into silence after his career ended. Following Emily's disappearance, something inside him seemed to calcify. He immersed himself in a strict routine, found solace in alcohol, and developed an emotional coldness that alienated everyone around him. Her mother, Lena, had once been a source of warmth, gentle and perhaps even delicate, but that part of her had vanished as well. Once the investigation went cold, Lena began to disintegrate in slow motion. Psychological fractures appeared as strange delusions and repetitive rituals. She would adorn every cabinet with sticky notes, offer prayers to the same flickering candle each night, and sequester herself in her room for hours, whispering to an unseen presence. Claire spent years trying to offer support, but her help could never fill a void in a heart that was shaped exactly like a missing child. When Claire departed from Asheville at the age of 23, she made a solemn vow to herself that she would never come back. Yet here she was, drawn back by a voicemail that should never have been left and a cassette tape that had materialized from nowhere. She was here because a quiet voice deep within her urged, "This time, don't flee." She now found herself sitting in her old childhood bedroom, the one she had claimed after Emily was gone. The wallpaper bore the faint, ghostly outlines of where posters once hung. Her old desk was layered with a thick coat of dust. A single drawer contained the few items she had left behind: a worn-out journal, an old student ID card, and a birthday card from Emily. "Happy 14th, nerd," the card read in a chaotic scrawl. "Don't get old too quickly. I need someone to order around a bit longer." Claire gently traced the ink with her fingertips. She hadn't allowed herself to cry yet. From downstairs, she could hear the refrigerator humming as it returned to life. The electricity was back on, but the tape remained in her hand, feeling cold and indecipherable. She no longer owned a cassette player. The library, however, might have one. The very idea of venturing out again, of facing people and having to offer an explanation, made her chest constrict with anxiety. But she was left with no other option. 2 hours later, Claire was standing beneath the stark, fluorescent lights of the Buncombe County Public Library, clutching the cassette in one hand and her driver's license in the other. A pleasant, middle-aged woman with a southern accent at the front desk looked from her face to the tape. "Haven't seen one of these in a good long while," she commented. "What's on it?" Claire managed a strained smile. "Just some old recordings from college. I'm trying to salvage a project." The woman gave a knowing nod. "Booth 3 in the back on the left. You'll probably have to rewind it by hand." Claire moved with deliberate slowness toward the soundproof listening booths. The air was thick with the scent of lemon-scented cleaner, aging paper, and forgotten tailies. Booth 3 was equipped with a functional cassette deck. With trembling fingers, she inserted the tape and pressed the play button. First there was static, then a stretch of silence. This was followed by the sound of footsteps on creaking wood and a door swinging open. Someone was breathing heavily and rapidly. A girl's voice, Emily's voice, emerged. "I think he's still downstairs," she whispered. I locked the door, but a sudden loud bang interrupted her. Emily let out a sharp gasp, followed by more silence. Then a second voice, this one male, spoke with a calm, familiar tone. "You shouldn't have come back." Claire slammed the stop button. She stared at the player, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her palms were slick with perspiration. The voice, the man's voice, it sounded so much like, but that was impossible. No, she had to be mistaken. She played it once more. This time she detected something she had missed initially. Immediately after the bang, as Emily gasped, another sound echoed in the background. It was like a bell, but not a telephone's ring. It was a chime, the kind made by a real bell. Claire's eyes widened in realization. The carousel. In downtown Asheville's Pack Square Park, there was a vintage carousel that had been restored in the 1990s. As a child, Emily had adored it. They had visited it every summer. It featured authentic brass bells that chimed with a delicate, clear, and impossible-to-mistake sound as it spun. Claire hurried out of the library, not bothering to check the tape back in. Her thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind. Why would Emily have been anywhere near the carousel at 3 in the morning? Who was the man? And what did "you shouldn't have come back" truly mean? She had to go there, regardless of whether it was a dead end or a genuine danger. She parked her car 2 blocks away, near a cafe they had frequented as children. The streets were deserted and slick from the morning's rain. The carousel was secured behind a tall, black iron fence, its lights extinguished, its horses frozen in mid-stride like specters from a forgotten time. Claire paced the perimeter, searching for anything out of place. There was no evidence of a forced entry, and there were no security cameras. Just as she was about to give up and leave, something glinted and caught her attention. Lying near the control booth, partially concealed by mulch and damp leaves, was a small plastic object. It was a keychain, its pink color faded with time, the type that illuminates when a button is pressed. Claire bent down and picked it up. It flickered on, a tiny bulb glowing from within a clear plastic star. She blinked, a wave of memory washing over her. Emily used to have this exact keychain attached to her backpack. Claire's hand tightened around the small object. She had no idea how it had ended up here, but one thing was now certain. Emily had been in this very spot that night, and she hadn't been alone. Someone else was here, too, someone who had not wanted her to return. Sleep was impossible for Claire that night. She lay awake on the worn mattress in her room, her gaze fixed on the keychain resting on the nightstand. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light like a steady heartbeat in the darkness. She watched it glow and dim repeatedly, her eyes refusing to close. Every clue, the carousel, the recording, the voicemail, converged on a single, chilling conclusion. Emily had returned that night and she hadn't been alone. Someone had been following her. At 6:12 in the morning, with the sky still showing the dark bruises of the night, Claire found herself at the kitchen table. Her fingers were tightly wrapped around a chipped mug of instant coffee. She had not yet encountered her parents and had no desire to. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she opened her laptop. There was a single resource she hadn't consulted in many years, the official police report. Much of it was standard procedural text. Emily was last seen at 8:30 p.m. dressed in jeans, a red hoodie, and black boots. Were there any witnesses? None. The timeline of events was unclear. Her phone's last signal was traced near the downtown area. After 24 months without any new leads, the case was officially classified as inactive. The prevailing theory was that she was a runaway, a possible voluntary disappearance. A wave of nausea washed over Claire. Emily would never have run away. She had called for help. She had been terrified. However, something new snagged her attention this time, a minor detail tucked away in the document, a footnote. It listed the evidence that had been collected: one personal cell phone, an iPhone 3G, one purple canvas backpack with a missing zipper pull, one pink Converse shoe, size 7, and one handwritten letter, the contents of which were not disclosed. Claire froze in her seat. A letter. She had never known about any letter. Her father had never brought it up. The police hadn't mentioned it either. It certainly wasn't included in any of the boxes of Emily's belongings they had returned to the family. A slow, hot anger began to build in her chest. Someone had deliberately kept it from her. Her father. She found him in the backyard, sitting in a faded lawn chair with a blanket draped over his knees, his eyes staring blankly into the distance. The man who had once carried a badge and possessed a voice that could command a room now seemed like a mere shadow of his former self, thinner, slower, and perpetually silent. Claire paused in the doorway for a moment, simply observing him. Then she stepped outside. "You knew there was a letter," she stated. He remained perfectly still. She moved closer. "Emily wrote a letter. It was part of the evidence. Where is it?" He blinked slowly and swallowed hard. "She wrote many things, Claire," he said, his voice raspy. "None of it meant what you're imagining." Claire's tone grew sharper. "Where is it?" He didn't respond with words, but his hand made an almost imperceptible gesture toward the shed. Claire didn't hesitate. She strode across the damp grass, pulled the shed door open with both hands, and peered into the murky interior. Inside was a clutter of old tools, dusty boxes, and thick spiderwebs. Then, tucked behind a pile of old winter coats, she saw it, a locked file cabinet. She grabbed a crowbar from a nearby corner. The lock broke with a piercing shriek of metal. The cabinet was filled with files, hundreds of them, all from cases her father had worked on. At the very back, she found a manila envelope with a stark label, Donnelly case. Do not file. With trembling fingers, Claire took it out. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The note was brief, perhaps only 8 lines long. She read it once and then a second time. Each word landed like a heavy stone. Claire, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. I didn't leave because of you or Mom or the fights. I left because I saw something I wasn't supposed to. I thought I could run, but now I know I have to stay. If anything happens to me, look for the man with the horseshoe ring. He'll never let me go. I love you. E. Claire crumpled to the shed floor, the air knocked from her lungs. Her hands shook uncontrollably. The man with the horseshoe ring. The description meant nothing to her, but it was clear Emily had stumbled upon something incredibly dangerous. Her father was now standing in the doorway of the shed. I kept it from you, he confessed. I knew you'd go looking. Claire slowly turned to face him. And you didn't. I was told not to, he replied. By who? He averted his gaze. You wouldn't believe me. Claire got to her feet. I believe her. She drove straight to the one person she thought might hold more pieces of the puzzle. Rachel Knox, Emily's closest friend during high school. They hadn't spoken in more than a decade. Rachel now resided on the outskirts of town in a small, gray house with a broken mailbox. A swing set sat motionless in the still air of the yard. Claire knocked on the door. There was no answer. She knocked again, more firmly this time. The door creaked open. Rachel looked older, her face thinner and pale. Her eyes widened in recognition and shock when she saw Claire. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I need to talk to you. Rachel paused, glancing nervously over her shoulder before opening the door just enough for Claire to enter. The air inside the house was thick with the scent of lavender oil and an undeniable sense of fear. Claire perched on the edge of the sofa while Rachel paced back and forth. I know why you've come, Rachel began. I had a feeling the moment I saw your name in that article last year. What article? Claire asked. The one about your award, that architectural prize. It mentioned you were from Asheville. I just knew you'd find your way back here someday. Claire furrowed her brow. What are you talking about? Rachel stopped her nervous packing. Emily called me that night, Claire. Claire sat up straight. You never told anyone that. I couldn't, Rachel admitted. Why not? Because she begged me not to. She said someone was watching her. She warned me that if I uttered a single word, he would come for me next. Who? Claire whispered. Rachel's voice cracked with fear. I never learned his name, but I'll never forget one detail. A ring. It was large and made of silver, shaped like a horseshoe. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. Rachel sank into a chair across from her, her hands clenched into tight fists. She told me she witnessed something in the woods, out by the old train tracks. She said it was connected to your dad's department. She mentioned finding a cabin and that someone was there who shouldn't have been. Claire felt a wave of dizziness. Where exactly near the tracks? Rachel shook her head helplessly. She never specified, only called it the old place. I always assumed she meant that campground we used to visit, but now I'm not so sure. Claire rose to her feet slowly. I have to find it. Rachel's eyes were wide with terror. If you go searching, please don't go by yourself. And if you find the man with the ring, do not let him know you're looking for him. That evening, Claire drove toward the foothills, to the area where the train tracks once ran. The forest had since reclaimed the land, leaving behind only the rusted, skeletal remains of a long-abandoned route. She parked her car where the gravel road dissolved into a dirt path, took out a flashlight and stepped into the dense woods. The deeper she walked, the more profound the silence became. There were no birds, no rustling wind, just the sound of her own breathing. And then she saw it. Through the trees there was a clearing, and just beyond it, partially hidden by branches and overgrowth, stood a small, dilapidated wooden cabin. The front door was slightly ajar. She gave it a gentle push. The inside was pitch black. Then the beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness and landed on something, a mattress lying on the floor. The walls were covered in photographs. Suddenly she heard a sound directly behind her. A footstep. Claire spun around, her heart pounding, but the space behind her was empty. Overcome with panic, she backed out of the cabin quickly, nearly fumbling her flashlight. That's when her eyes caught something hanging on a hook next to the door. It was a ring, large, silver, and unmistakably shaped like a horseshoe, and just beneath it hung a photograph of her. Driving home was out of the question for Claire. She couldn't bring herself to do it. For more than an hour, she drove aimlessly around Asheville, the photograph resting on the passenger seat. The image of that ring was permanently seared into her mind, a picture of her, pinned to the wall of a decaying cabin. Her hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. There was no more denying the truth. Someone had been watching her, possibly for many years. If that cabin was still in use, it meant someone knew she had been there. When she stopped at a red light, Claire finally pulled over, parking near an old diner once famous for having the best peach pie in the area. She hadn't eaten since the previous day, but food was the furthest thing from her thoughts. She went to her car's trunk and opened it, gazing down at her father's old case files, which she had quietly taken from the shed. She picked up one labeled Internal Affairs Closed. The documents inside were heavily blacked out, with some sections almost impossible to read, but a single line caught her eye. Complaint filed by E. Donnelly against Officer Paul Griggs. Allegations of misconduct, surveillance, and coercion. Case closed due to insufficient evidence. A chill went through Claire. Paul Griggs. He had been one of her dad's closest friends, a regular guest for dinner. She remembered he once gave Emily a leather bracelet for her 16th birthday, claiming it was from a person with excellent taste. The memory had been buried until this moment. She dug further into the files and found his current address, still in Asheville. He was still employed, with no disciplinary actions on his record. But why would Emily file a complaint against him? And why was it dismissed right before she vanished? Without a second thought, Claire made a decision. She drove to his house. It was a small, neat home with a green mailbox out front and a wind chime on the porch that tinkled gently with the breeze. She rang the doorbell and took a step back. There was no response. She pressed it again. A curtain moved in the window and then the door creaked open. Griggs appeared older and heavier, but his eyes were still sharp and calculating. "Well, would you look at that?" he said. "Claire Donnelly." She remained silent and still. "I have to ask you something." He leaned casually against the doorframe. "It's been 15 years. "I know what Emily did," she stated firmly. "She filed a complaint. You were harassing her." Griggs's expression didn't change. "You should leave." "She said she witnessed something. She was afraid." He let out a slow breath, his eyes scanning the street before returning to her. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Claire moved a step closer. "Then explain it to me." He held her gaze for a long time, and a subtle change came over his face. Too clever. She poked her nose into matters that weren't her concern. "I warned Jack, your father, to make her keep quiet, but Emily wouldn't listen. She thought she was some kind of hero." Claire's voice trembled. "Did you hurt her?" "No," he replied, "but someone else did." Before she could press for more answers, he shut the door in her face. Claire stood on his porch, shaking. Someone else. She drove back to the cabin, but this time it was daylight. She parked her car further into the woods and walked quickly, her eyes darting between every branch, her ears attuned to every sound. The cabin was exactly as she had found it before, empty, quiet, and waiting. She photographed the wall, the pictures, and the ring. Then she spotted something she had missed earlier, a small, scorched notebook tucked beneath the mattress. She carefully opened it. Most of the pages were burned and torn, making them unreadable. However, one page had survived the damage. It read, "March again. He said she's back. He doesn't know I'm watching. I found the envelope. The one she buried, it's real. They'll deny it, but it's all here. If this is how it ends for me, tell her I'm sorry." Claire stared at the words. It's real. She grabbed the notebook and ran. Later that day, Claire arranged a meeting with Detective Hannah Ruiz, a young and direct officer with an observant gaze that seemed to miss nothing. Ruiz had heard bits and pieces of the Donnelly case but didn't know the full story. Claire spread everything she had found across the table: the voicemail, the cassette tape, the notebook, the photograph, and the letter. Ruiz examined each piece of evidence in silence. Finally, she spoke. "We need to exhume this case, reopen it officially." Claire nodded in agreement. "But we need one more piece," Ruiz added. "If this envelope exists, we have to find it." Claire had no clue where Emily might have concealed something so important. She drove to the one place that still held the scent of their childhood, the attic, filled with old boxes, books, and tangled Christmas lights. She sat there for hours, lost in memories. Suddenly, she noticed a floorboard that was slightly out of place. She pried it open. Underneath, wrapped carefully in plastic and tied with string, was an envelope. Inside were photocopies, old pictures, a police ledger, and one document marked for internal use only. Another paper had an address on it, the train yard. Claire's heart began to pound. She brought the document straight to Ruiz. The detective's face grew stern as she looked through them. "These are records of unauthorized surveillance, diverted funds. Your father's signature is on one of these." Claire felt sick to her stomach. He wouldn't do this. "He may not have been the one to start it," Ruiz conceded, "but someone used his name. Someone was covering their tracks, and Emily discovered it." The following morning, Claire's mother collapsed in the kitchen and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said she was disoriented. Claire stayed by her bedside for hours. Just as she was preparing to leave, her mother's eyes fluttered open. "Did you find her?" she whispered. Claire froze. "What?" "I saw her last week at the market. She had on the green jacket." Claire gripped her mother's hand. "Mom, are you certain?" "She looked right at me," her mother insisted before her eyes closed again. Claire left the hospital in a daze. If her mother was right, if Emily was still alive, then the situation was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. It meant someone knew she was alive and was actively making sure she was never found. She drove straight to the train yard where Ruiz was waiting for her. The place was deserted, with rusted gates, a collapsed watchtower, and graffiti covering the walls. The air was heavy with silence. Claire found the door with the number from the ledger. It wasn't locked. Inside, they found a filing cabinet which Ruiz had to break open. It was filled with dozens of tapes, each labeled with a date. One stood out: March 1st, Emily D. They played it on Ruiz's portable recorder. At first there was only static. Then a voice emerged. "Subject in sight, female teen wearing red, visual confirmed." After a pause, the voice continued. "She entered the station alone, met with subject 2. A different voice cut in. "Proceeding with silence protocol." Then a final, chilling command: "Don't let her leave." Claire's vision went blurry. They had been following Emily. She had known, and she had tried to run. They had silenced her. And now Claire feared they might be coming for her. But there was one voice she still hadn't heard on those tapes, her father's. She needed answers from him, and she needed them tonight. Claire drove back to her house, her hands clamped tightly on the steering wheel, her thoughts racing like an uncontrollable fire. She was finished with trying to connect the dots. It was time for the whole truth. Her father was in the living room, asleep in his recliner. A war documentary flickered on the television, but he wasn't watching it. Claire turned it off and sat down across from him in the dimly lit room. "I know about the tapes," she began. He moved slightly but kept his eyes closed. "I know Emily filed a complaint. I know they told you to back down, and I know you didn't." Jack Donnelly slowly opened his eyes. His face looked gaunt in the faint light. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Then make me understand," she demanded. "Explain why my sister's name is on a surveillance log. Explain why she said you knew. Why did you hide her letter?" He met her gaze directly. "Because I thought I was protecting her." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "She was 17, Dad. She called me. She said someone forced her to do something. She left behind a tape and a letter. All the evidence shows she was trying to tell us the truth, and you buried it." He sighed, his shoulders slumping with a heavy weight. "I didn't know the whole story, not at first. But when Emily started getting involved, sneaking around the department and asking questions she shouldn't have been asking, I knew she was putting herself in danger. Claire's voice cracked with emotion. She did get hurt. Her father looked her straight in the eye. No, Claire, she didn't get hurt. She got away. Everything inside her stopped. What? He nodded. She ran. Claire shook her head, refusing to believe it. No, she disappeared. Her phone's last signal was downtown, and then nothing. I helped her, he confessed. That night I met her at the carousel and drove her to a contact I had out west, someone I could trust. I thought it would give her some time. She wasn't safe here, he went on. Not with what she knew, not with what she had found. I told her to lay low, that I would handle things here, but the more I investigated, the more I saw that there was no fixing it. You lied to me, to Mom, for 15 years. She made me promise, he said. She told me if you knew, you'd come looking for her and it would put you both in danger. It would never be over. Claire stood up. Where is she? I don't know anymore. I think she changed her identity again. I tried to find her, but every lead went cold. She turned away, her heart pounding. So, she's alive, and I've been grieving a ghost all this time. Claire walked over to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in vibrant shades of red and orange. She stared at it without really seeing it. Then her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Claire. Her knees nearly gave out. That voice, it was her. Emily, she breathed out. I saw your name in the news, Emily said. The Architecture Award, I knew you'd come back. I'm so sorry. Claire slowly sank into a chair, speechless. I never wanted any of this, Emily continued, but they're watching you now. You were at the cabin, they saw you. Where are you? Claire whispered. I can't tell you, not yet. You don't have to hide anymore. I found the letter, the tapes, everything. There was a moment of silence on the line, then Emily spoke again. It's much bigger than you realize, Claire, and it's not over. The call ended. Claire stared at the phone in her hand. A moment later it rang again, the same number. She answered, but this time it wasn't Emily. It was a man's low voice. You should have stayed away. The line went dead. Claire's hands were trembling. She immediately called Ruiz and told her everything. They agreed to meet that night, secretly, in the parking lot of a church downtown. Ruiz arrived with backup. This is proof she's alive, Ruiz said, but it also confirms that someone is still trying to cover this up. Claire nodded. Ruiz went on, that photo of you in the cabin wasn't just surveillance. It was a threat. There's something else, Claire said, pulling out the scorched notebook once more and pointing to the word envelope. I think she left more behind. They devised a plan. They would search every property Emily ever had access to, every locker, every storage unit. And then Claire remembered something from their childhood. Emily used to hide things behind the old carousel in the park, in a hollow post near the control box. They called it their treasure spot. They went there the next morning. Inside the hollow post, concealed behind a rusted metal panel, they found a flash drive. It contained several PDF files and a video. They played it in Ruiz's car. The video quality was poor and grainy. A younger, terrified Emily appeared on the screen. If you're watching this, she said, her voice shaking, it means I didn't make it out. Or maybe I did, and I want the truth to be known no matter what. She held a document up to the camera. This is a list of names, police officers, business owners, lawyers, all involved in a surveillance network. They're tracking people, teenagers, minorities, activists, under the guise of preventive security. It's illegal, and the corruption runs deep. She looked directly into the camera lens. Some of them work in my father's department, but I don't think he knew the extent of it, not really. They used his signature, his security access. He tried to warn me away, but I didn't listen. She took a deep breath. Don't trust Griggs, don't trust anyone you see wearing the ring. She held up her arm, revealing a dark bruise. They know I found the ledger. The night I recorded this, they came to the house. I think I have one chance to get away. If I don't make it, I'm sorry." The screen turned black. Claire sat in stunned silence. Ruiz switched off the car's engine. "You mentioned a ring in the photo at the cabin," she asked. Claire nodded. "This isn't just about surveillance," Ruiz concluded. "It's about blackmail, profiling, and control, and Emily got way too close." That night, Ruiz obtained a federal warrant. A team raided the cabin, but it had been completely cleared out. Everything was gone except for one thing. Pinned to the wall in the exact spot where the photo of Claire had been was a new photograph. It was a recent picture of Emily, taken at a farmer's market, and she was wearing a green jacket. Claire stared at it, a cold dread washing over her. She recognized that jacket. Her mother had been telling the truth. Claire was seated in the sterile quiet of her mother's hospital room, clutching a photograph of Emily taken just weeks earlier at a local farmer's market. In the picture, Emily's smile was undeniable, and her eyes held the same familiar light. She was wearing the very same green jacket that Lena had described. Claire gazed at the image for what seemed like an eternity, struggling to accept that it was real. She tried to convince herself that after 15 years filled with silence, shadows, and deep scars, her sister was not a ghost but a living, breathing woman who still smiled and walked the earth. With trembling hands, Claire held the photograph out for her mother to see. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you were right." Lena's tired eyes fluttered open, a glimmer of awareness returning. "I saw her," she murmured, as if recalling a distant dream. Claire gently squeezed her mother's hand and affirmed, "You really did." In that moment, a smile spread across Lena's face, the kind of smile that signifies a deep wound finally beginning to heal. That evening, a call from Ruiz brought the confirmation they desperately needed. He had a surveillance image from a toll booth camera near the South Carolina border showing the same face and the same green jacket. The license plate was traced to a rental car registered under a false name, but critically, they now had a location. Ruiz asked Claire if she wanted to come along. The 4-hour drive took them through winding highways, past sleepy small towns, and alongside vast, empty farmland. Claire remained silent for most of the journey, her mind a whirlwind of loud, anxious thoughts. What do you say to someone who simply vanished for 15 years? How do you speak to a sister who chose silence over a simple goodbye? A dreadful question surfaced. What if Emily didn't want to be found? Finally, Ruiz turned off the main highway onto a gravel path that led to a small, secluded cottage beside a canoe. A single, warm light glowed from one of the windows. When Claire stepped out of the car, her legs felt unsteady and light, and her heart pounded against her ribs. She walked slowly toward the front door, each step feeling like she was shedding a layer of long-held pain, the years of unanswered questions, the recurring dreams of Emily still being alive, and the self-loathing for not answering that one fateful phone call. Now she was here. She raised her hand and knocked. After a long, agonizing silence, the door creaked open and there she stood. It was Emily, older, thinner, with her darker hair pulled back and a faint scar tracing her jawline. But her eyes were exactly the same. They locked onto Claire's and held their gaze unmoving. For a moment, neither of them spoke a word. Then, Emily stepped forward and enveloped Claire in a tight embrace. Claire began to sob, a deep, gut-wrenching cry that comes only once in a lifetime, released from a wound that finally understands it can close. They clung to each other in the doorway, completely oblivious to Ruiz standing respectfully nearby, watching in silence. When they finally pulled apart, Claire cupped her sister's face in her hands. "I thought you were dead," she choked out. "I had to be," Emily replied softly, "to stay alive." Inside the cottage, the atmosphere was quiet and simple. There was a table, a chair, and stacks of books on the floor. A faded photograph of Claire and Emily as young children was tacked to the refrigerator. With hands that shook slightly, Emily poured them both a cup of tea. Claire looked at her sister, her heart full of questions. "Why now?" she asked. Emily took a deep, steadying breath. "Because I saw your name in the newspaper," she explained. "And I missed you. I knew that if I didn't run again, you would eventually find me." Claire swallowed hard. "You should have called," she said, the hurt still evident in her voice. "I couldn't," Emily responded. "Not for a very long time. I was being watched. I had to change my identity twice. I lived in shelters and moved from city to city, hoping they would finally give up looking for me." "And did they?" Claire asked. Emily's gaze shifted away. "Some of them did," she admitted, "but I don't think Griggs ever did, or the people behind him." Claire's voice cracked with emotion. "We found the tapes," she said. "The cabin, the photos, the flash drive." Emily nodded slowly. "I needed to leave a trail." "You left one for me, Emily. You always did," Claire said, leaning in closer. "What happened that night? What really happened?" Emily's voice dropped to a soft whisper. "I discovered they were watching kids, recording them, and interrogating them without any legal cause. The list I found had our neighbors on it, friends, even kids from our school. I thought that if I exposed what they were doing, they would stop. But I was naive." "You weren't naive," Claire insisted, taking her sister's hand. "You were brave." "I was scared," Emily confessed. "I still am." Claire wiped away her own tears. "You don't have to be anymore. Ruiz is with me. He believes everything. He's seen the proof." Emily looked at her, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "There's one more thing," she said. She stood up, walked over to a drawer, and pulled out a small box. Inside was a necklace, a silver chain with a tiny key. Emily handed it to Claire. "This unlocks a storage unit in Atlanta," she explained. "It has the original ledger with names and dates and even video footage. If anything happens to me, you have to release it." Claire nodded firmly. "We'll go together." Emily didn't answer immediately. "I'm tired, Claire," she said, her voice weary. "I'm so tired of running." "Then stop," Claire urged. They looked at each other, the silence thick with unspoken emotions. Then Emily whispered, "I missed your voice." Claire managed a small smile. "I missed everything." Back in Asheville, Ruiz began making the necessary arrangements: witness protection, testimony scheduling, and a complete media blackout. Claire stayed with Emily every single day. They fell back into an easy rhythm, cooking together, laughing, playing music, and talking about everything and nothing. Then one night, Emily asked a question that had been weighing on her. "Do you hate me?" Claire blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For not calling, for disappearing," Emily clarified. Claire reached across and took her hand. "No," she said firmly. "I hate what they did to us. I hate the silence, but I could never hate you." Emily looked down, a wave of relief washing over her. "I thought about calling you on your graduation day," she confessed. "I had a phone and I still remembered your number. I just stared at the screen for an hour." A tear traced a path down Claire's cheek. "I would have picked up." "I know," Emily whispered. "That's why I didn't." On the final night before Emily was scheduled to give her testimony, Claire found she couldn't sleep. She walked out onto the porch barefoot, a warm cup of tea in her hands. The stars were brilliant in the night sky, and the air was pleasantly warm. A few moments later, Emily joined her, and they sat together in comfortable silence. "You remember the carousel?" Claire asked softly. A faint smile touched Emily's lips. "How could I not? You left me a message right before everything happened." "I did," Claire nodded. "It was on my old phone." "I didn't hear it until a month ago," Emily revealed. "What did I say?" Claire asked, looking at her sister. "You said, 'It's not what it looks like.'" Emily nodded slowly, a deep understanding passing between them. "It never was." Claire leaned her head on Emily's shoulder, and for the first time in 15 long years, they watched the sun rise together. It was raining in Asheville again, a soft, relentless rain that didn't cause floods but instead seeped deep into the bricks, the trees, and the skin. It was the same kind of rain that had been falling the week Claire returned. Now she stood by the carousel under an umbrella, watching the empty, painted horses turn in slow, silent circles. The carousel had been beautifully restored, with new lights, a fresh coat of paint, and cheerful music playing once more. A new generation of children would soon play in the very spot where she and Emily once stood. Her breath misted in the cool air, and her hands were warm around a paper cup of coffee. Emily was gone again, but this time it was by choice, not out of fear. 2 days prior, Ruiz had arranged everything: protective custody, a new identity, and in time, full immunity in exchange for her testimony. The documents Emily had safeguarded for so long, the final, irrefutable proof, had been sent to the Department of Justice. Arrests were already being made. Names that had once commanded power through silence were now echoing in news headlines. Justice hadn't arrived with a loud crash, but it had arrived. As for Claire, she had stayed. Someone needed to tell the truth from the inside. Ruiz had offered her a job, not in law enforcement, but in community architecture. Her role would be to restore public spaces, places that were meant to belong to everyone. She accepted the offer because, for the first time in her life, Claire wasn't just rebuilding broken houses for strangers. She was building a future for herself. A week later, Claire found herself back in the attic of the Donnelly house. She no longer needed answers, but she did need closure. Reaching under the loose floorboard, she placed the old cassette tape back where she had found it. She wrapped it carefully, sealed the space, and then added something new: a photograph of two sisters on a carousel laughing together. It was a picture from before the silence, before the storm. "Thank you," she whispered into the dusty air, and then she closed the floorboard for good. That night, Claire made one last call to her father. They hadn't spoken since the day she had confronted him about his lies. He answered on the third ring. "Claire," he said, his voice hesitant. "I don't forgive you," she stated, her own voice steady and clear. "I know," he replied quietly. "But I wanted you to hear it from me," she continued. "She's safe. You don't have to lie anymore." A long silence stretched between them, finally broken by his choked whisper: "I'm proud of you." She didn't cry, she didn't respond. She simply ended the call, and that was enough. Somewhere hundreds of miles away, a woman now known by a different name sat in a safe house, reading a letter her sister had mailed her. There was no return address and no signature, just a single, powerful sentence: "They can't silence us anymore." She smiled, folded the piece of paper, and held it close to her heart. Outside, the rain began to fall again, but this time it didn't feel like grief. It felt like something new was beginning to grow. 15 years ago, a voicemail had been ignored. 15 years later, it had changed everything. In the end, it wasn't just the sound that mattered most. It was the voice, the one she still carried inside her, the one that refused to be forgotten.